want to spend as much time as we can today talking about is just the sort of our role in the larger like technical society. Like we are both builders of software. We both have interesting overlaps in the kinds of things that we've worked on and that we want to work on in the future. And I'd love to like learn from each other. Like here's the thing that I've been thinking about for a while. Here's the things I'm running into. Here's the problems that I have. I want to learn from the things that you've been pursuing, and then also like figuring out how we might work together in the future. It's like, okay, how can we be part of this larger movement that's heading towards a kind of software and a shape of computer?
And in this we, and I don't know if all of those we's are the same, but I guess in this last we, I heard we, not only you and me, but in the sense of like other people who could be in these spheres. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can picture them in my mind of like who some of those folks are, and conversations that I've had with them that are in a similar vein of like you're pursuing this larger goal or this larger effort. And I am too, but I have my little part. So the way I think the framing is pretty straightforward. You started this thing called Zero Data several years ago, zerodata.app, and there's this. The basic idea is that like customers, as far as I'm understanding, I'm repeating from memory.
Please repeat from memory.
Yeah, so the customers own their own data. They have none of the data, it exists on their devices, so that may or may not exist on any like servers or remote devices, but it at least exists on
a space they control.
A space they control, absolutely. And then applications are able to access their data by basically by the customer's permission, and would be storing that data in a space that the customers control, as opposed to like on their own.
Holding onto it,
Yeah. So Zero Data, I'd love to hear more about that. And then I'm currently working with this company called DXOS. DXOS is a platform for building local first applications, which are local first and Zero Data have a lot of overlaps. It's not 100% overlap, which is kind of interesting, but local first, collaborative apps where users own their own data. So we have kind of a way that we are accomplishing that technically, but we're at the very early stages of building sort of the platform layer that developers could then build on top of to basically give them the framework or whatever for Zero Data trivially.
Exactly.
And the question that I'm encountering right now is like, okay, what next? Like the then what question. It's like, okay, assume that multi-device sync, local first data, user owned data, works offline, is collaborative, manages synchronization conflicts for you. Assume that you just get that for free.
Right.
What do you do? Right? And so I feel like you've been actually experimenting in this territory with Zero Data for several years, and you've learned a lot. I want to learn from that, and then I want to share like the things that I'm most immediately working on and saying like, how can I make this come to life? Like, anyway, that's...
Wow, okay. Like Zero Data, first of all, for me, it's basically a name. I mean, it is like, it's not like a robustly specified protocol or something like this. It's actually just a name to describe the things that you were describing. And it came from me wanting to draw a circle around the different things that are out there that have the same shape, so that they could, at least those things could talk to each other in some way, in terms of the people who are thinking about those things and working on it. Specifically, those are the remoteStorage project, which has been around for about 10 years. It's a grassroots open source initiative, and they do have a kind of protocol in progress, but it's been a bit slow. But that's been existing and functioning, and I've actually been using that for the last 4 years as my because all of my apps are, or perhaps dApps, are Zero Data. So I use that to sync my data around. Anyway, so there's that one, and then there's Fission, which is a company I used to work with, and they're doing some stuff as well around user-owned data. They also add encryption to that, using IPFS to store it. And then there's the Solid project, which is by Tim Berners-Lee, and they have a more like hyper-structured data approach to things, and they want like machines to be able to read that data and create interesting kind of permutations, visualizations, etc. For me, they're all the same thing. It's like in the sense of, well, in the Zero Data name, they are all storing data in a space that the customer, as you say, controls. So I want to just call it all one thing so that it's not linked to a specific project or company or initiative. Like we can think of it as a concept, like local first, right?
Right.
We wouldn't want to say Google local first or something like that. We like local first.
Yeah.
So just to kind of detach it in that sense, but also to increase the pool of people that could be thinking similarly or find collaboration. And that's just the idea. That's grandiose the way I'm saying it.
Right.
I mean, it was just like a website, and I just put the apps on one page and the links to those things. But I'm happy that people started using the name, and it became kind of at least a kind of term that people can use to describe that phenomenon. And so DXOS is also very much like, from the demo that you showed me, I was blown away by that, and like that's totally like, yeah, own your data, keep it on your space. So anyway, so that's what it.
When did you start it? I'm curious. Like,
I would say 2019.
That's what I feel like it was 2019.
End of 2019.
And I think that's when the local first paper was published too.
Oh, really? No
2018, way. 2019, somewhere around there. I'd have to go look it up, but it's right around that time.
Interesting.
Did you read the local first paper when it came out, or did it only come to your attention later?
I've probably seen it. I mean, I must have read it before that. Yeah, and local first, it's kind of. So the remote storage project, which I just mentioned, is funny because they have this JavaScript library, which, in the way that you're talking about it, like trying to make some of these things as easy as possible for the developers. So like all I have to do is read and write, and I get like all of the rest for free basically. And it happens to also be local first for like the last like 5, 6, 7 years or whatever. So I was like, oh, okay, that's the thing from the remote storage library. But I did read it before doing the zero data thing, and part of the reason why I'm enthusiastic about it is basically the way that JavaScript library works. It's like, as a developer, like, yeah, it's great, I just read and write, but then as the person using the app, it's like, wow, okay, my data's offline, I have it with me, I have all of my notes, it syncs very easily, pretty fast. It's not a super fancy like collaboration multiplayer layer yet, but that's I didn't need that because I was mostly using individual tools for myself. So I was like, this is great. Like, why can't everything work this way?
Yeah.
Can you imagine if, like, just every form of computation we use had some flavor of this? Like, it just feels good.
Yeah.
And furthermore, like on local first, like this, I used to call apps kind of like a public space, because the way I architected it is a kind of single page application, static web app, runs offline. So you'd come to and there's no like you just show up and there's nothing to do. Like, you can just start writing or saving stuff or doing things right away.
Right. You're not on a marketing page. It's like you're dropped straight into using the app.
Yeah, there's no phone number to call. Like, you're just dropped into the thing. You don't have to sign in, sign up, provide any information, identify yourself. It's just there, like a park. You just walk into it and you can make use of the space and leave when you want, and nobody's going to bug you. So I was very much interested in how local first enables that in this kind of app.
It's interesting. It's almost like a commons, kind of like a little bit like the space that we're in right now. I mean, this is owned by a church, which is over here, but it's still a space that's available for the community. You can just walk up, sit down. Yeah. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so all of those things kind of went together for me. And it's more about enjoying the experience of using that and like, wow, this is cool. How can we get more of this?
Yeah. So you launched the website. I think last time that I looked on there was like 150 or so apps listed under zero data app. Like, where did those apps come from? What are some of those? What are some of the ones that people might know or that I might know? Or
I don't know if people would know them. I mean, it's kind of a mix of different things. It's basically like an automatically compiled list from the remote storage project and a list of unofficial fission apps that I made. And the solid list of apps that they're aware of, that people have made from the community. And I just put it in one place, and so that when people think of one of those projects, like remote storage or fission or solid, like they would think of the other ones as well and understand the larger sphere that it's operating in. And so put it in one page. And so it's basically from those projects. And there's another thing, I just started collecting stuff that I think was like zero data-ish or like local first-ish and just putting it there. Yeah. Those ones are probably more well-known. But yeah, in terms of, I feel like it's nothing's coming to my mind anyway of something that would be super well-known. They're all quite smaller projects made by individuals that are passionate. Sure. And so, what are some of the ones that you use like regularly? All of mine. Well, what apps have you written? Rosano. I mean, but frankly, like that is kind of the majority of my experience with it. Well, actually, the one that's been around, which is not mine, is actually one by Steven Van I forget his last name, but he's working at
Vander, yeah, I know.
Vanderbilt, I forget his last name. But
I said Asset.
He did, what's that called? It's like a music thing.
Oh, cool.
My mind is drawing a blank. Anyway, I didn't use it much because I tend to use like my iTunes, the native one, but like it's a beautiful app, and it was supporting remote storage back in the day, like a few years ago, and I think he's added Fission support, and like you can connect AWS and all kinds of storage to it. It's it's like a beautifully made music player where you can connect different kinds of storage, right? And then it gets you to think about like, oh, okay, so I can have different options around my storage, right? And where to put my stuff. Diffuse is the name of the app. I think it's diffuse.sh. So and I love that it's just a beautifully made app. Like, it's not like, oh, this is just a prototype that I hacked together and I don't really care how it looks, like, which is also fine, but it's nice for drawing interest into the space when people make these super compelling experiences. Anyway, so that's one that actually some people may have heard of because it's been around for a while. And then the ones that I've made are like Hyperdraft, which is my note-taking tool of choice, and I take my notes in it, my to-dos are in there. I have Launchlet, which is like a custom JavaScript on any website, bookmarklet, stuff like that. I have Commit for flashcards, which I use to help me learn languages. I have Joybox for saving links, audiovisual oriented links. I have Emoji Log, which is kind of personal tracking, diary-oriented, journal-oriented stuff. Now I also have ShareSnip, my QR code reader, which I'm telling everybody to use when they want.
QR code will be on the screen.
QR code will be on the screen. Thank you.
In order to get to ShareSnip.
And I have some other ideas, but like I'm sort of in between all those. Yeah.
So you've been building apps this way on remote storage for like 4 years or more.
Yeah.
Like, what's been surprising? What's been frustrating? Like, what's your experience been like? Do you believe in zero data as much or more than you did in 2019? Like,
I think I still believe in it. I'm still enjoying it and using it and feeling the same sense of satisfaction with how everything works. Like, that has not changed, and I would still love for more of that to be around. I think I've come to terms with in the last year of not assuming that everybody should already I mean, I would love for everybody to have it, but it's not non-trivial for people to try something new like this. So I feel like it's just
when you say people, you mean like end users that are going to be using the software, not necessarily developers who
perhaps even both, but more so the end users. Like, I think, like, even let's say we have a great collection of even like 20 apps or something like that. It would be great if people felt compelled to use them, and a lot of the times people are curious, but then they're like, oh, I have to sign up for something, and like, I don't know what this means, and I have to trust this company, and like, it's just a bunch of big questions, and like, it's not so straightforward to get into, and then it's also just more complicated. Like, they won't just use their Google account or something they have to get a new thing, and so there's all this friction. So I just think I'm trying to be more realistic with that. It might just take a bit longer, and part of that is maybe the developer experience to have certain capabilities that are like standard now, which aren't always available, and your company's working on that. Part of it is the user experience or the customer experience, where like, how do people use the app and interact with it and understand like their own model of how stuff works, and to feel good about that.
Yes.
Perhaps also maybe it should matter. Maybe it should just be about having a great experience, period, and maybe it wouldn't matter so much about the data, or like they wouldn't notice it. Perhaps that's also a dynamic, but I think those things are important, and and yeah, just like ubiquity, you know, like I think this stuff works well. In my case, I don't need other people to use it because I'm using, as I say, a tool for an individual.
Right.
But like, a lot of people want to collaborate, they want to write documents together, edit video together now, and like all kinds of things. So when that's possible, maybe it becomes more interesting. And so I'm just like, I'm trying to just set my expectations or in a different place, because I understand the sphere of technology is the way it is now, and people maybe want something that's not ready, like we don't have it to offer to them yet. Yeah,
that's interesting. So I wonder if I have a couple of directions we could go from there. So I'm curious about like what, if we could enumerate what the specific frictions are that you think end users specifically experience, and if there would be ways to alleviate that from a UX perspective that basically don't change anything about the way that the software works, but provide affordances that they're familiar with. Like we tried a little bit of this kind of stuff at Fission when we were doing multi-device recovery, basically. So one of the foundational things for Fission applications and DXOS as well is the local space where you store your data is encrypted with your private key. And and it also allows you to share it with others over a local network, and so it's encrypted over the network, and they have to be able to decrypt it, and that kind of stuff. So there's an encryption element here, and I've got my keys and can. Now the problem with that is your keys live on your one device, and so there's no password, there's no cloud, there's not your data isn't going to some other server or some computer where it's like saved. So if you lose that device,
you lose your data.
You lose your data, but even more importantly, if you somehow wipe out your keys, which unfortunately in a browser is possible to do. Like you could reset the profile. You might be, some website might be bugging you about cookies, and you're like, I need to go clear out my cookies, and an end user might accidentally say reset all instead of reset my cookies, and then they just blew up their keys, and now their data is still sitting on their device, or it got deleted in that purge, but what doesn't matter because their key's gone. Yeah. So they cannot unencrypt that data. Yeah. So what we did at Fission to like alleviate that is we built a flow for end user applications that basically prompted you to sync with a second device when you first sign up. So like you go in, you create an account, and it's like, all right, now connect a second device, and we used a QR code to like bring that second device in there, and then do like pin code exchange and that kind of stuff. And what it did is it sent your private key to that other device. So now you've got your private key on two devices, and so at least if something happens to this one, you've still got this one. Yeah. But the reason I mentioned that is because as we were designing that flow, we tried to make all of the flow feel like a two-factor auth flow. So people are more or less familiar with two-factor auth these days.
Put in a pin.
Put in a pin, sync your second device so that you can have a second factor for authenticating. And we even went through existing two-factor auth flows from a bunch of well-known products, Apple, Google, and different things like that. Looked at the language that they were using to describe the flow and tried to adapt that, like stay as close to that as we could, so that the end user experience would feel very familiar, even though a very different thing is happening than what's happening with like OAuth, and where that end server is holding your password for you and is verifying your password. Completely different under the cover technically, but feels very familiar to try and ease that point of friction. Yeah. But I'm wondering if there are like amelioration, or if there's a mediation like that we can take that would help with people feeling comfortable in these spaces. So anyway,
I have had some experience like going back and forth with how people feel about my apps, and
that's what I'm curious about.
But actually, I would say the thing that I have the most experience with, what I've meant there is like the odd person that just emails you or sends a message every now and then. I have no connection with, but they're using it and they think it's interesting. So I have like a little bit of that sprinkled around, but I actually have this like 6 to 8 month period where I was in Brazil helping some of my Brazilian friends learn French, and I would use my flashcards app commit for this. And I knew before starting that like I can't ask them to like sign up for an account and like figure out what everything means. Like I have to just give them something and then get started with the actual language stuff. So I actually like signed up for an account, or a remote storage account, like for each person, and I would like hold their password somewhere, which is again not like, but so
with remote storage, you do have to sign up for an account.
Well, it's based on servers, and it's based on servers, and each server can have, it's like instances now with Mastodon, I guess. Like you can host your own instance, or that's the idea of what it should be. But because self-hosting has been complicated and perhaps still is, there's like one company that's like the sort of sponsor of this movement, of this project, and like that's the kind of canonical place that I direct people, because that's the easiest thing. You can just sign up, and there isn't really like a great option there, which is kind of another dimension of why it might be hard for some people to get into it, because like, who's this company, can I trust them, like is their data protected well? So anyway, but I used what I had, and I made like a bunch of accounts I made an account for each of my friends, and like I just kept the password somewhere, and like I would only use it for this purpose, just to facilitate the flashcards being transferred. And so it was cool that they enjoyed the local first aspect of it, and like I would sign into their account on my like private window, and they would be like in another part of this country, and it would be remotely, like we'd work together, and I could make a change on my device and it would show up on their account, right?
Awesome.
Because I was logged into their account, right? Maybe that's not the ideal way, but that flow was happening, and I think they enjoyed that. And I had to explain certain things, like if you're going to edit something, wait until I'm done so that my thing can come through, you know, this kind of thing, which is not fun, right? It would be nice to just like be messy.
I mean, I think that's what you're, so there's a couple layers for these things, and we can get into talking about this, but like there is local first storage, so like where is the data stored?
Yeah.
Then I think about another layer, which is replication, which is how does the data get onto all of my devices, or how do I access the data? And there's another layer again from there of how do I synchronize the data when there are conflicts. So like change over here in A, change over in B, how do I synchronize? And then there's like another layer that we've already discussed about identity, like who owns this account, who sets it up, and then can you, if you combine all those layers, if you have like the local storage, replicating across devices, synchronizing changes so that like when things are broken, or like when it knows how to intelligently merge, and everyone has like their own identity, then you get this really interesting stack where you get kind of some of the stuff you're describing for free. Yeah. But the important part about your story, I guess, is that you were able to simulate that with remote storage, and was a good experience. Like,
I mean, they were learning and they were happy with the process, and they were happy to engage with me. And I think the technology was like not the most interesting part of it, right? But it shouldn't be, right? And it shouldn't be, right? So it facilitated what we were trying to do, and they were happy with that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it was great. And like, so what other domains can we do that in? You know, how else can we like help each other and use something that has more agency instead of...
The thing I love about that is, so I have this like, thesis is too strong of a word, but I think of software now as the only way software gets adopted is socially. That is, so it's like, even in the olden days when there wasn't an internet and we didn't have internet connected computers, software adoption was still social. You heard about a piece of software from a friend. You maybe you read about it in Macworld magazine or in like a shareware distributed disk or whatever. But like humans always adopt software, adopt tools by hearing about it from someone else. And so this idea of what you were talking about earlier of groups of people bringing in groups of people fits perfectly in my like software adoption hypothesis.
Prove functionality to groups.
Yes, prove functionality to groups.
Which I will credit to, I think his name was Scott, who I met like 15 years ago when he was working at Zipcar, and I just always remembered that.
Yes.
So it's not my idea. But
yeah, and so what you did with that group of language learners.
Yeah, I mean, actually, they were individuals in that sense, so they weren't in a group.
And that's what I was about to point out, is is if you could have brought those folks together into a group, I think that there would have been, what we're seeing with like a lot of software these days is when you do that, you see people using the software more, you see people helping each other, there's a feeling that I'm in a space with other people, and that collaboration has both benefits for the actual user of the software, in that they use it with more depth and more frequency and that kind of stuff. That can also be manipulated in really horrible ways. But assuming that the person actually wants to learn a language and wants to collaborate with others, that group setting is really important.
Yeah. I would say the technology needs to be invisible for that to happen, or as much as possible, because if they are in a group and they're all like talking to each other about how difficult it is to do XYZ, or like why, how do I log in and I don't have my cell phone or whatever, like then that kind of gets in the way, right? But if it's invisible and they're again not thinking about the technology and they're just learning the language or just having fun being around each other, then the software, like you have a positive feel to like, oh yeah, and that when you think about it, you'd be like, yeah, I had so much fun when I was with my friends, and that's what you think about when you think about the software. So.
That's interesting. One of the things we're working on at DXOS, and we'll talk more about this later, is this thing called Composer, and it's an environment for building these kinds of zero data applications, but where all of the applications can work with one another. So instead of just the data is owned by the user, and the application asks the user for access to the data, these applications can then see each other's data, and that allows you to do interesting and creative things that we haven't been able to do very well since in a while.
And this is beyond a kind of file browser kind of thing,
yeah, well,
in what way?
So DXOS is based on a like key value graph based data, like document store. So the way you interact with it from JavaScript is very similar, like just read and write JavaScript objects. It's like, the developer's experience is very simple and straightforward. And then under the covers, you've got this like graph document data store. So it's not files, right? It's objects,
right,
or documents, depending on how you want to think about it. And when the interesting thing is it's like a single document data store for all of the users' data across all of their applications. And so if an example of that, like how that cross-app interop might work is you've got your commit app for learning languages, and you're working in that application, and as you go through a whole bunch of, say you did a bunch of work that day on memorization, like went through a bunch of cards and that kind of stuff, and you wanted to visualize that somehow in an app. You could have another app that is just a charting app, and you can feed any arbitrary data to that charting app, and it can generate a chart for you. It's like single purpose, very sharp tool. Give me your X and your Y, and put this piece of data on X and this piece of data on Y, and I'll draw you a chart.
Cool.
And you can do that in a separate application with the data from your commit app, because it's right there in the same data store.
Exactly.
And you don't have to add a chart feature or a track progress feature to the commit app. And what's cool about this is, like, I'm starting to see, as you start to build apps in this way, apps get much smaller. Like, I think one of the reasons apps have gotten so big is because they don't have the ability to interop very easily. And so now allow someone to track progress in their language learning app, you actually have to build that into the application itself, because there's so much friction for an end user to like export the data, load it into Microsoft Excel, like draw a chart, all that kind of stuff. With this sort of this cross-app interop with a single shared data substrate, it becomes trivial. It's just like the data is in that charting app.
Does that mean that when you sync your device, if you're in an app and the data is syncing, it's not syncing only that app's data, it's syncing like your whole... Okay, your whole collection.
Yeah, the best way to think about it and we can talk about how we architect this in the browser, but the best way to think about it is your entire data store syncs to your device, and then applications all have the ability to write to and read from that entire data store, and that data store is, you think of it like running in one process on that device, and all the apps are just simple dumb little views to access that one process that's running.
I'm realizing that, like, I'm noticing this now, like even with iCloud stuff, like my notes, actually, is it notes? Which is the thing? I had the feeling that the point of relying on Apple apps that use iCloud for sync is that I don't have to open the specific app in order to sync it, because iOS just syncs everything magically, and I don't have to like make sure I grab it before I go offline. And I'm noticing somehow that I think it maybe doesn't do that actually. So I feel like, well, what's the point of using this shared? Is it a shared data substrate in iCloud, and it's not? And
iCloud is kind of, right?
It should be, at least,
one of the things that iCloud does is it does partial replication. So instead of replicating the entire data store to your device automatically, it references like links to your device is aware that the data is there, but it might not be on the device until you request it. So like lazy loading, which is actually really helpful, especially for mobile devices where you don't want to eat up your entire thing. So it's pretty neat. iCloud's actually an incredibly impressive piece of software that solves a lot of the problems we just talked about. But it's not available across devices, not available in the browser, it's not available across
so to be able
systems.
To do that with web apps, for example, I think would be super cool. Like, I don't have to open like Hyperdraft, for example, and I could just, if I open something, at least like it'll somehow connect together.
And so that's exactly what DXOS gives you. I was telling some of the DXOS guys that I was meeting with you, and I was like, if I can't convince Rosano to use DXOS, like if then I can't convince anyone. Like, he's like literally probably the most perfect person. Like, he's been building apps this way for 4 years on top of remote storage. He's been like going through all of the pain that DXOS is supposed to solve for you.
Right, right. Well, I'm convinced it's just about actually like finding the space to do it. But
and it's that is always the case. And I totally understand. But the reason I brought up Composer is because one of our hypotheses about Composer is that chat inside Composer is like a core place to start. And what I mean by that really is group interaction. A group that's working together in Composer should be able to interact with one another inside the application and not have to leave. Believe me, I do not want to build yet another messaging platform. Like, that's like the furthest thing from our ambition. But when we look at the way people use software, especially as they work together in software, they need a way to communicate with each other. And then the other realization that we had is a lot of what I do in chat, I'm actually bringing data or like some reference to something from outside of the chat world into that chat, talking about it, and then maybe even bringing that again out of the chat world into some app. And if the chat is existing in this interoperability space, then I could be editing a chat. We could like co-edit a chat message together and then say like turn into a document, and it just does that seamlessly, and then I can go open it up in a document editor. Like there becomes this fluidity between we're having a conversation right now, but then it becomes another item that's editable and accessible and all.
Ooh, that's cool.
It's exciting. So we're working on that, but very early. We have like some super raw prototypes, but it feels really good.
So in terms of friction also, something that was cool with remote storage, at least, like they have, if you put in an API token for Google or Dropbox, they could, like, you could have somebody bring in their Dropbox account and just store everything there. It's not perfect and it doesn't completely support the official protocol, but I think that's actually super useful that you just, if they already have a drive or their data somewhere, just support that, even if it's not completely feature parity with your platform. And I'm rethinking this now for Hyperdraft. We were talking about this on our last call about how there's a kind of, even if you own the data 100%, you still don't feel like you can grab onto it, right? And it's like it's less tangible, especially if you're not developer oriented, like, and you don't have like JSON files. And I'm realizing, at least for Hyperdraft, that it's not enough to just support a zero data protocol, but also offer people to perhaps connect their drive, perhaps connect their GitHub repo, which has text files in there, perhaps use that new shiny Chrome only API where you can edit files from the browser.
File system API.
System API.
So nice.
Perhaps, and this is actually the one I'm super excited about right now, like edit my Ghost blog with Hyperdraft. Because I don't want to write in somebody's writing tool. I want to write in Markdown in my thing, and I know Ghost works that way. So so now it's like, okay, Hyperdraft is not like, it's just an interface. And it can support different backends, and that's not a novel concept, but for me it's like, it took me a while to just realize like, okay, that's the kind of flexibility I need to give to people so that they feel that. And
that's that cross-app interop that we're talking about. It's like, use the tool for the thing, use the Sharp tool for what it's good for.
Right.
And you want to write in a Hyperdraft, you should be able to write in Hyperdraft. Right? So we actually support two of those things already in Composer. We support connect to GitHub repo and edit your text files inside Composer. So you can edit in github.com or edit on Composer, and they sync both ways. And we also support the local files thing. The file system API.
You didn't mention that last time, so
it's pretty nice to like play with. But the one that I want to build now, because I do all my editing in Obsidian, is I want an Obsidian plugin that does sync two ways. Again, like that, Obsidian's all written in JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever, and we have a TypeScript API, so it should be fairly straightforward to build an Obsidian plugin that's basically, this is what Obsidian's sync, built-in sync does, and they actually support using alternative sync mechanisms. You don't have to use Obsidian's $10 a month sync. They've built their editor is extensible such that you can even extend it to support additional sync protocols. So you should be able to sync that with your DXOS space, which means that all of your documents are editable both ways. And that would be amazing, because
that would be amazing.
I don't want to build an entire text editor that is like competitive with Obsidian inside the browser, inside of Composer, right? I want something that's good enough that I can use it for like 20% use cases, but most of the time I want to type in Obsidian. And then also like, you want to use Hyperdraft, I want to use Obsidian, some people like Google Docs, like they should all be able to interoperate with one another.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what's the term for this or how different it might be from Zero Data, because in some sense, like let's take your example of the Obsidian or even my example of like the Ghost blog, like that is technically a kind of Zero Data, because like it's stored on a space that they control.
Right.
I mean, if they might be hosting it also, and so it's not like one of these. It's not shaped like remoteStorage or Solid or even DXOS, but
it's an account they control.
It's an account they control, and it's their thing. So there's that, but then there's also like what we want is not necessarily to store the data on a kind of pod or personal data store, let's call it in that way, that's specifically designed for the purpose of storing people's personal data, but like we want like a flexibility of means or something. You know what I mean? Like have different options to, and it's not necessarily even about storage. It's just like different options to interact and sync, and so I don't know how we call that, but something like that.
Gordon Brander has this excellent term, credible exit. Did you read
Credible exit is also another way.
It's like I can, if I wanted to move off of Ghost, if I wanted to leave Ghost, what would I have to do? Right, and I think the interesting world is this interesting sync thing you're talking about like using Hyperdraft, which I think that's what you were implying, using Hyperdraft to write your blog posts that then publish to Ghost. So then you have this relationship between a document in Hyperdraft and a blog post in Ghost that you publish. And ideally they would be in sync, right? Like I run into this problem all the time because I write a lot in Obsidian, and then when I go to publish on, we also use Ghost for DXOS as a blog, but when I publish my newsletter through Button Down, those two things are not synchronized. And so I like write like 90% of the article in there, and then I go copy paste it into Button Down. Now I'm in Button Down, and I'm like, as I'm reading through it, I see a couple of like typos, or like I reformat it slightly so that it looks a little bit better. But now I have two different versions of the doc that are out of sync, and like minor changes between the two, and like, it's frustrating. And so it's creating this synchronization where the document is kind of the same in both places that I think is really important for like usability. So I'm not copy pasting back and forth all the time. But I think it's also important for that credible exit of like, if I left Ghost for whatever reason, I already have my documents. They live over here in my remoteStorage or my DXOS space or whatever. And they are one and the same, right? I may have lost the hosting capabilities of Ghost and the URL and all that kind of stuff, but I have the data. And that service that Ghost was providing me of hosting it for me for that time, I'm no longer paying for that service from them. But I've already, it's like, there's like credible exit and there's like exit by default. It's like I'm already in a place where all of my data is stored on a space that I own.
I like that.
And then even as I'm like pushing it to Ghost as so that they can serve it for me, letting GitHub host my code for me for the time being, I can always exit my service relationship with those folks. And I've already exited. Like I don't have to do any additional export work.
And that's what Zero Data should be actually kind of exit by default. I
like that. It's a nice ideal. Because it does solve the other side of the UX problem, which is like the data's living over there and it's out of sync with this data that I have on my space.
What do you think about this question that I'd sort of brought up while I was talking about my flashcards experience with my friends, that like in some sense it may not be important that they actually own 100% of their data, like in the sense of the way we are familiar on the personal data store, where you can see like the objects and like this is something that's more interesting to programmers. Like I think if you told the average person that they could see the properties of their JSON objects, that it would be just as like meaningless as like not owning their data. So what's the kind of useful thing that you think the average person would need, whatever this average person needs, but like what do you think would be the kind of level of, I don't know, Boris has this term handedness, that would be appropriate to make people feel like it's worthwhile? Or does it matter at all? Maybe it doesn't matter.
I mean, I'm going to keep beating this drum because I really think it's important, but I really do think it's interop and group collaboration.
Interoperability and collaboration.
I really believe the interop case, because I'm sure this is
Because
like...
then they're not interacting with their data directly, they're interacting with different interfaces on that data.
And the data flows seamlessly between those interfaces, which is something they don't currently experience. In fact, I've seen it in a lot of folks who are not professional developers, but who are using technology. And my wife, my kids, my friends. I was talking to a friend who is a software developer, and he works at a very large organization and has a project that he's the technical lead of the project, which means that he's responsible for some project management and like oversight of this. And I think he has like 20 or 30 developers that are across the project that working on different pieces of it. And he described his project management workflow to me on Friday, and it was a just absolute crime of lack of interop, the fact that he has to do all this manual work, and that he's a software engineer who should have the ability to solve this problem. So he uses, they use GitLab for actual managing their source control and pull requests and all that kind of stuff. But then they use Jira for representing tickets. So there's pull requests and tickets that have to be mapped between the two of each other, and you have to copy links back and forth between the two. He also uses Jira for their estimation, because their estimation tools are better than GitLab's tools. So he has to copy things over from GitLab into Jira and make sure that they're all represented there, and then he has to do estimation, and then he has all of the members of the team, so he'll make a plan in Jira and then copy it over into GitLab so that people have the actual PRs assigned. I mean, it's that's just the start of it too, because he realized that he really needs some sort of Microsoft project-like view, because he has 20 or 30 developers across 5 major components on this huge project. So there's actual dependencies, like developer A can't do this until developer B finishes this other thing. He's I need to represent those dependencies somehow. Neither Jira nor GitLab has sufficient things there. So he has his own whiteboard where he basically built his own, drew his own Gantt chart effectively. He told me at the end of the day on Friday, he's yeah, I realize why people use Microsoft Project now, but I don't want to use Microsoft Project. So he copies things over into a whiteboard setting where he draws the relationships between things, and he has to keep that up to date as well. And then finally, when someone asks him for, internally asks him for a plan about hey, what are you going to be doing for the next 3 months, or what about accomplishing this demo at this time, he does all of that work in a document, because he's thinking in prose. He's I need to describe the plan, all that kind of stuff, which then I need to copy the work items into the document. So he uses 4 different systems and has to copy paste between the 4 systems, and they have and he's looked into syncing between GitLab and Jira, and it's always jank and always broken. Right. But I think the failure of interoperability leads to many, many, many frustrations for people in computers today. And so that's I see that problem everywhere I look, probably because I'm so focused on it. But it does seem like something that we can reasonably attack if we had a shared data substrate.
When I hear you talking about how important interoperability is, mm-hmm. I want to say that, so you're really talking about adoption. Because if developers would have adopted, it doesn't matter what the thing is, but if it's well adopted, then apps would work with that thing, even if it's not designed well for that thing. But you'd have a larger selection of apps that are interacting with the same data and presenting views on the same data, and people have a selection of apps that they can trust, they can have flexibility of their data with. So, of course it's important what the technology is, but it's
no, you're right.
Let's say you do create the perfect thing, and then if it's kind of a tree falling in the forest thing, if there's only 2 people interacting with your interoperability system, is it interoperable?
Exactly. There's a law that I came across in last year called Metcalfe's law, which is basically about the value of networks, the value of the network is the square of the number of participants in the network, and so it grows dramatically, quadratically, I guess, as the size of the network grows. And so as long as it's small, there's not a lot of value in the network. But as it gets bigger, there's
and I don't want to downplay 2 individuals working with each other or smaller groups also.
No.
I mean, it's beautiful. But in terms of trying to change the direction of the way technology, you started off by talking about how we are how do we position ourselves in the space of this larger technology movement sphere? And so if we want to have some impact over that, like we have to do things that get adopted, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. I do spend a fair amount of time thinking about adoption, which is why I was asking about friction.
Right.
Because I'm interested in lowering the frictions that I have control over, because there are some that we don't, right? There are some that are like intrinsic to the shift between two different ways of approaching technology, and so like let's lower all the ones that we can.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is also just to start not from a technical, like I think we start from a technical, and I include myself in this, like to start from the technical perspective, because that's what maybe we're good at, or we feel like we can manage, and like that's the part that we know, that's our part. And then it's also possible to just start from the social perspective, and you're just like helping people with what they need, and then building the back end later from that, like the way Stripe had set up their systems initially by manually getting bank accounts for people, and then eventually they found a way to automate it and make it systematized, but to this just work with the meat first, work with people, and then go from there to building the technology to support that, because then you already have something that's collaboration, and that it requires the interoperability, so you build that. Perhaps you're doing that with your team.
We definitely are. I mean, that is the purpose of Composer.
Right.
And we share that same belief that a valuable technology will be a byproduct of a truly valuable and transformative technology will be a byproduct of people using that technology to accomplish some other purpose that is not the technology itself. And that whole Ruby on Rails was extracted from Basecamp. It was a valuable framework because it was valuable for that team in building their own product. So we're trying to take that approach with Composer, and we're starting by using it ourselves, using it in a team and that kind of stuff, and we're thinking about what are other groups of people that we can prove functionality to, that we can get started using that. But you're right, so much of this just doesn't matter if it's not adopted, and especially with this sort of shared data substrate piece of you have to get to some critical mass before that's valuable. I think the other way that I think about DXOS, because I mean, let's be honest, like the odds of something that DXOS is creating being a significantly adopted shared data substrate in the future are fairly low. Like people have tried this before, and they will try it again. So what's the value in working on it if it has low probability of success? There actually are some really important technical problems that you have to solve in order to even have a chance to be adopted. And so one of the things I love about working at DXOS is it is a open source project. It is a very open company. Like we talk about all the things that we're doing. You can see almost all the stuff we're working on GitHub, or just come chat with us in our Discord. And so I'm hopeful that like even if the core project is not successful, the ideas can live on, and that we've solved like important transferable problems that other people can then like just come and grab that solution off the shelf. You don't have to worry. We spent 5 years solving that. It's solved now. Like here's the general shape of the solution, and now you can just build. And I feel like that's what has been happening since the local first essay. I feel like auto merge has come a long way, and CRDTs have come a long way. And that's for those who aren't familiar with CRDTs, it's a data structure that like allows you to solve the problem that Rosano was talking about earlier, where you have two people editing a text field at the same time. You can just get that for free in a variety of very well supported packages in JavaScript. So it's just solved. There's a lot more like further research to take CRDTs to different kinds of data beyond text. Rich text presents some unique challenges, but there are people who are working on and basically knocking down those problems one after another, which is really exciting because it just gives us these primitives that we can then bake in. Like DXOS, for example, uses YJS as one of our core primitives. We didn't have to write our own CRDT. And I think there's other like things at the networking layer in terms of like peer-to-peer networking There's things at the data storage layer. So IndexedDB is available in the browser, but now there's this new thing called the Origin Private File System that not a lot of developers know about. It's basically like a more robust file system / data store that's faster than IndexedDB and has like better characteristics. Not available in all the browsers yet, but it's available in some. We talked about the file system API. So like there's these different ways that the capabilities of the technology layer are changing such that it should enable some of this innovation to actually come to the forefront and make it easier for developers to just opt in to like, this is the way I'm going to build software now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, well, I mean, for zero data and like your own applications, I'm really curious, like, what are you working on today? What are you working on tomorrow? Like, what's next?
I wouldn't say I'm actively working on it because I've just had a bunch of personal experiences for this year that have been the focus of my life. So I haven't been able to move much. I mean, I was actually trying, I think I described this in my going free thing where I was working on like replacing my funding button, which is kind of purely zero data based. Like you need a zero data account in order to give me your money, you know? And that, I don't know if that was
interesting
because again, not everybody has one in terms of adoption. It's not there yet. So I'm sort of creating barriers for people to support me financially through the project. So I was trying to find a way to make that simpler. Use Ghost, which has
it does have subscribers built in,
subscriber mechanisms, etc. That was kind of what I was trying to do this year, and then I wanted to integrate that into all of my apps. And like 6 months later, it seemed I've just removed the concept of payments from my apps, and it's just free, because that's what feels like the direction I want to go in terms of being or offering things that are open and accessible and being abundant and closer to like the way Wikipedia works, where lots and lots of people use it. Not everybody pays for it. Some people help keep it running. Some people help create it in terms of the content. And
are your apps open source, by the way?
All of them.
Yeah. Have you had any people contribute to the apps themselves?
I've had one person do translation stuff and one or two bug reports, but basically, like I would say, not so much.
Right.
There's one person who even made a kind of dark theme for Launchlet, which is cool, but he just did it over like Twitter or something, so not GitHub. So yeah, and then I think I've wanted that actually. I would have loved to just have more, and that's also another kind of fundamental thing I've been thinking about. It's like, okay, I can't actually do this alone anymore. Like it's just too many apps, too many projects. Like apps, like I have 6 apps and then I have like my other projects, you know, and it's like I feel at times crushed under the weight of my own output, and how to maintain that. Like, because I don't tend to just make something and then it's like a brief period and then I just don't touch it ever again. Like I keep thinking of most of the things that I do as like living permanently or just, and I don't have to work on it all the time, but you would try to keep them somehow maintained or in the loop, and that's just feeling impossible.
It's a lot of maintenance.
I'm out of date with myself in some ways. Like I'm using a 2019 stack, which doesn't sound that far away, but like it's very slow and it waits for the whole app to build, which takes like 30 seconds to a minute each time I make one change, and like the tests are flaky because I'm using this old library. Like, so it needs to be upgraded in that respect, and like so there's so many things that need to be kind of gutted and renovated, and it's like a house that's been around for like 40 years, you know?
Boy, I live in one of those, so I totally understand, actually. I can tell you what all the problems are, and I haven't fixed all of them either. It's like, I just
you gotta
go
live,
in and,
you know, you actually have to live your life somehow in that house. And I am, and this is actually kind of a testament to how, like the question about like, what is it, you know, how do I feel about the way zero data works? Like I still love using them every day, actually, even despite all of the shortcomings. Like we were just talking about development, but just I'd want to highlight again, like using it is great.
Yes.
But yeah, just fixing your house, it's like that's it just takes time, and then you have kids, you know, you have like, and you have this busy life doing projects as well, and like it's hard.
But you're right. I mean, it's important to go back to the fact that like living in your house and living in your apps, like there's an experience of that is very satisfying, and my house has a lot of problems, being built in like the 50s, and there's a lot of things I'd like to fix about it. But getting up in the morning and like opening the blinds out onto like the front yard, and the sun rises across over the trees across there, and sitting in, I have this like green armchair that's sitting next to the fire with like a little like lamp there. I sit and write in my journal and just like watch the sunrise.
Yeah.
That's an amazing experience.
Yeah.
And the fact that like the pipes are all copper, and there's like blockage in the blue bathroom because of the copper pipes, and so the drain runs really slow, and there's no amount of Drano that's going to solve that problem. I'm going to have to like actually replace them with PEX, or like pay a plumber to do it, or whatever. It's like, yeah, okay, we can live in both realities of like enjoying the thing that we've created, even though it's not perfect. And I think, I'd love to. I mean, a larger dream for software is that it would be the kind of tool where people can get it halfway there and use it and live in it and enjoy it. I feel like spreadsheets are actually a good example of this. People trot these out a lot for like software that end users use or whatever, but a lot of people have spreadsheets that they use for various aspects of their life or their business. And almost always, if you tell them like, or if you open the spreadsheet, they'll like apologize for certain parts of it. Or like, oh yeah, don't go to that panel. Or like, oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, my house is messy.
Exactly. Sorry, my spreadsheet's messy. And I'm hopeful that software can head in that direction as well, to where it feels less industrialized, more personalized, more something that I am able to adapt for my own use and not have to perfect.
It's an interesting analogy with the house, because people have different levels of handy personness about
skill for sure.
Skills like how do you say it, like home. I forget what the term is, but just like to feel like you can fix things in your house or make updates, make renovations, like decorate, like all of these actually have some kind of parallel in software, and we accept that some people, they just don't want to touch anything like that. It scares them to even like like clean their toaster, maybe, because they might like, so there's all kinds of, and then some people like, they want to just like rip out their own walls, and like, so you have a spectrum there of people that want to mold their own spaces and how much they want to do that. And you also just mentioned like paying a plumber to fix something. So I'm interested in like what all these parallels could be in the software world, like in the sense that people can, I feel like the default we have now is most people are at the sort of like not wanting to clean the toaster thing. Like it's all like, I don't know what that is, it's scary, it's like I might lose my data, I might do something bad or wrong, or like, and so it's like the reflex is it's better not to touch it, actually, just in the way that things are designed. But how might we design it so that it feels more like, okay, this is my space, actually, or it's like a space, it can even be a community space, and like I can do things here, I can feel like I have agency and move things around or construct something. And so what does that feel like, I guess, and what could that feel like?
I mean, I think one of the reasons I'm attracted to like local first, zero data, that software stack, and one of the reasons I believe it is the future, is that programs get smaller. Like they're simpler, they're focused on one or two things, like almost like
you read Jeff Raskin.
I haven't actually read it. It's on the shelf. Though. It's in my anti-library of creating user interfaces. Is that the name of the book? Humane interfaces or something.
Anyway, one of the I read that one, so I guess maybe you didn't read that one.
I haven't read it yet. I flipped through it.
Okay, fine.
I have the habit of, if I hear about a book that sounds good, I just buy it. And I've added it to the anti-library and books that I want to read, that I'm inspired by. Maybe when we get back to my house, we should like flip through that and find that and see if we can find something in that, since I have the book.
But it is something he talks about a lot. Like you mentioned this earlier about like the Sharp tool, like something that specifically does something really well. Like you have a writing tool that like really nails the writing experience. In your case, might be Obsidian, and you don't want to use like a text field you want or some other rich text editor. You want to use your tool, and it should be possible to just use the thing that's specialized for the thing. And that's something that I've first got from him, or whichever book that was.
But I think that simpler, making software simpler, when it's simpler, it's easier to understand, it's easier to modify, it's easier to like learn by looking at it and that kind of stuff. I think the other one that needs to change is software. We need to be able to get to the bits that like the source, not just the bits, the source of the software. So and replet's actually a really fun example in this space of like you can start up a replet and it's got all the code right there. It's running right there inside the replet. You can then share that replet publicly. I think by default on the free account, they're all shared publicly. So it's like little like running programs that are running on the internet. And I can go look at your program. I can use your program and then go look at the source code. And then I can fork it and like modify it on the fly.
Is this only like static stuff, or it's including like server oriented?
It's server oriented.
Wow.
They don't have an offline first solution yet.
Okay.
Although I've heard rumblings that they might be working on that, because they are working on a desktop application right now, which is awesome. Getting it out of the browser into like a, that I think that's a sign like in going in that direction. And with DXOS inside Composer, we're shrinking applications all the way down to like plugins. And those plugins can be tiny little lightweight things, and we're thinking about what is the distribution mechanism that would allow people to basically not just install a plugin in their copy of Composer or whatever, but also have the source such that they could modify that and adapt it to their usage. And then what's the relationship between those programs, right? This is now a fork of this other program, and kind of it's so interesting to me that like forks have not taken off on GitHub. Like that's like a native feature of GitHub, and yet it's used sometimes, but it's actually pretty rare.
Because it's focused on the source, and it's not focused on the
running application,
the building and running of the thing. And I guess that's what Replit is doing.
Yeah, and that's what a plugin would do.